Hello everybody and welcome back to another video. This time around we're doing a little bit of Leaguestart theory crafting. Big disclaimer guys, this video is being recorded on May 28th. This is before the live stream reveal. This is before the patch notes. Everything in this video is speculative, it is tentative, and it is subject to change. So now that you've been warned, let's talk about the build. The footage you see on the screen is recorded on a level 90 Duelist Bladestorm Champion build. Duelist is the class, Bladestorm is the skill, Champion is the Ascendency we've picked for our Leaguestart. Alright, let's start by talking about the Bladestorm skill. This is an attack skill with the melee tag. It reads that it performs a spinning attack, damaging enemies around you and creating a Bladestorm matching your stance. Alright, Bladestorms deal 50% less damage with hits and ailments. You can have a total of 3 Bladestorms active at one time, and the duration of each Bladestorm is 3 seconds. There's also 2 types of Bladestorms for us to talk about. We have Bloodstorm. The 3 important things about Bloodstorm is that first, it's stationary, second, it increases the damage you deal with bleed, and third, it gives you more attack speed while you stand in it. Right, then we also have Sandstorm. Sandstorm is mobile. It moves in an outward direction away from your character. This one doesn't have any modifiers to bleed. Instead, it gives you increased movement speed while you are in it. Right, the TLDR of how this skill works is that you swing your weapon, you create a storm, and then that storm sticks around for up to 3 seconds and does a lot of damage. Alright, we can use Sandstorm in Sand Stance to clear large swaths of enemies, and you can use Blood Stance to create blood storms when you're fighting single target enemies that are preferably stationary. Alright, we did mention that there is a bleed component to this skill. For our build, we are completely ignoring this bleeding component. Bleed is something I would recommend you invest into in an optimized endgame setup. This is a Leaguestart setup, so usually you only have the luxury of focusing on 1 or 2 things. Bleed is something that is unfortunately not one of the things we are using to scale our damage in this build. If you've never interacted with stance skills before, your character is in blood stance by default. This means that you will always at least have access to Bloodstorm. In order to access Sandstorm, we need to swap stances. You do this using a stance skill like Blood and Sand or Flesh and Stone. And basically, you press a button, it swaps your stance, and now you can use Sandstorm instead of Bloodstorm or whatever skill you're using that interacts with stances. Okay, now that we've talked about Bladestorm, I think it's worth talking about the transfigured version of this skill, Bladestorm of Uncertainty. Everything we talked about is basically the same. The only difference is that you have no agency over what type of storm you create. So instead of relying on what stance you are in, the skill gem just randomly shoots out a storm. Sometimes it's a Bloodstorm, sometimes it's a Sandstorm. It is quite literally a coin flip on what you get. Now you might be wondering, why the hell would I want to do that? Well, a Bladestorm of Uncertainty makes up for its randomness by giving you access to more damage. So I'll compare the 2 skills I have here right now. So we're getting a 20% damage multiplier for using the transfigured version of the skill. So the other cool thing about Bladestorm of Uncertainty is that the more damage with bleeding is not attached to the stance that you're in. This means that you can actually inflict heavy bleeds with a Sandstorm as long as you're using the transfigured version of the skill. Once again, this isn't a bleed build, but it's just something for you to consider because if you want to scale your single target damage to be relevant in the endgame, maybe you want to do some bosses or juiced contents, bleed is going to be the way to go. Now that we've talked about how the skill works, let me tell you how it felt to play. I swapped into Bladestorm immediately when I got it at level 28. Up until then, we leveled up with Sunder. Sunder feels really good for clear, but the single target damage really starts to fall off as you go through the campaign and start mapping. Bladestorm with its Bloodstorms actually solves that problem, but our clear speed was a little bit slower compared to Sunder. So if you want to use the skill right when you get it, expect to lose a little bit of clear speed and gain a little bit of single target damage. It's really up to you. You can use Sunder up until maps. You can use Sunder up until you get Bladestorm of Uncertainty. Alright, I'll leave that up to you, but what I did was use the skill immediately and it felt pretty good. When we got into maps, we swapped into Bladestorm of Uncertainty. By the time you're in maps, it has good enough AoE for it to be a clear skill. So all in all, the progression was very smooth. It was fairly survivable, dealt enough damage. I think I ended up clearing the campaign in 6 hours 30 minutes, and I wasn't zooming by any means. I was just having a good time, trying to get a feel for how the skill played, and we still got a sub 7 hour completion for the campaign. I guess the long story short is, guys, I enjoyed the skill enough to want to make a video on it. So yeah, I really like it. I think it's good, and I think you'd like it too if you decided to try it. So now that I've talked about Bladestorm and how I feel about it, let's get into the details of the build, how we've decided to scale damage, what kind of gear you should get, how expensive it'll be, all that stuff. But before that, let's zoom out of this real quick. I was doing a little bit of cosplay shenanigans. If you know, you know. But let me just swap out of this little Innsbury Edge. We'll put our helmet back on, we'll put our jewelry back on, and then we'll walk through the character. So like I said, the character is a level 90 duelist. We have 6,442 life. It is blood magic, so we have no mana. The aura we are using is Purity of Elements. This is attached to Eternal Blessing, so it doesn't reserve any life. We are also using Petrified Blood because it is a low life build. We're using Vitality for life regeneration. These are fine to reserve on your life. All right, our stance skill we are using is Blood and Sand. Even though we are using Bladestorm of Uncertainty, we still want to use this skill because when you swap into Blood Stance, this gives you 14% more damage, and that feels really good for a single target. All right, here we have a Bladestorm of Uncertainty. Don't worry about the tooltip DPS here, guys. It's going to tell you it's trash. I promise you, it's really not that bad. If the gameplay footage is anything to go of, trust that instead of what Path to Building or the tooltips say. We have Blood Rage here. Blood Rage was put into an automation setup. That way we are always using Blood Rage when we are in maps. Gives us some attack damage leached as life, gives us attack speed, gives us, more importantly, a chance to generate frenzy charges. What else is going on with the skills? We're using Leap Slam as a mobility skill. We're using War Banner for situational single target damage. Bladestorm involves you standing still anyways, so you might as well stand still on a War Banner. And then finally, we have Frostflank for an instant travel skill to avoid mechanics that you can't leap slam through. And then we have Enduring Cry because we only use one life flask in this build, and if you're out of life flasks, you might as well use Enduring Cry to regen some life instead. Alright, so that is the basic gist of the abilities we are using. Let's talk about how we're scaling damage, guys. Alright, first of all, this is a pure physical damage build. That means we are only using physical damage. You cannot use elemental or chaos. It won't work with the way we've decided to scale our damage. Alright, second of all, this is a hit damage build. We are not using ailments, we are not using bleed, we are not using damage over time. We're using damage from our hits when we attack enemies. Alright, the best way to scale physical hit damage in Path of Exile 1 is by using the Impale mechanic. We're going to get Impale with passives in our passive skill tree. So if I type in Impale, you'll see here that we have a cluster here, we have a cluster here, and I think we have one more cluster of Impale over here. Okay, some of you guys might not know what Impale is. So let's read what the game has to tell us. Alright, when an impaled enemy is hit, the Impale reflects 10% of the physical damage of the impaling hit to that enemy. Impale lasts for 5 hits or 8 seconds. That's not very helpful if you don't really understand what they're talking about. So let me break it down to you the best I can. The first thing we need to do to scale our damage with Impale is get chance to impale on hit. Alright, from our passives, we have a 100% chance to impale with main hand hit. So every time we hit the enemy, right, we swing our weapon, we do our Bladestorm, we are causing an impale when they get hit. Right, so what exactly is an impale? Impale is a debuff, and like the tooltip says, it lasts for 5 hits. So when you apply an impale to an enemy, you can hit them 5 times, and each time it's going to proc the impale. So what happens when you proc your impale? It takes 10% of the hit damage that caused the impale, and it deals that to the enemy. So I'll give you an example. I'm fighting a monster and I hit it for 1000 physical damage. This is an impaling hit and it causes an impale debuff on the enemy. That impale stores 10% of our damage. So 10% of 1000 is 100 damage. Okay? So for the next 5 times I hit that enemy, it is going to proc that impale, dealing 100 damage each time. So if I hit it once, I've dealt 100 impale damage. If I hit it twice, I've dealt 200 impale damage. And then 3, 4, 5. By the time we get to 5 hits and the impale debuff is consumed, we've done a total of 500 damage from impale, on top of the 1000 damage we dealt with our initial hit. Alright, so right off the bat, having a 100% chance to impale is a 50% damage multiplier for your physical attack builds. But we can actually improve that by a large margin. How do we do that? Well, we do that with our passives once again. Okay, I'm going to show you this one over here. So this is Forceful Skewering. I decided to anoint this. It gives us a chance to impale, which is nice, but it also increases impale effect. So with a 10% increase impale effect, instead you are storing 11% of your initial hit damage. So increased impale effect means that you are storing more damage and then dealing more damage when you proc the impale. Right, how else can we scale impale damage, guys? Well, we can do it by increasing the number of impales that are inflicted. So normally impale lasts 5 hits. You take something like brutal skewering, now impales last 6 hits. Okay, so instead of going 100, 200, 300, 400, 500, it now goes up to 600. So now it is a 60% more damage multiplier as long as you have 100% chance to impale. Right, another way we're going to increase the number of impales we can inflict is through our Ascendency. This is Master of Mettle. Impales you inflict last 1 additional hit. This combined with the passive I just showed you means we are now at 7 hits for our impale. Alright, more importantly, we have a buff here. You and nearby allies deal 6 to 12 added physical damage for each impale on the enemy. So times that number by 7, and that is how much flat physical damage we are getting against enemies that are impaled. Okay, so that's Master of Mettle in a nutshell, and hopefully that explains how Impale works and why we're using it to scale the damage on our build. Alright, with Impale out of the way, what should I talk about next? We are also getting a lot of flat damage from a very particular support gem. This is Bloodthirst support. Supported attacks deal added physical damage with weapons equal to 2% of your maximum life while on low life. So our character here, you can see, has 6,442 life. 2% of that is 129 flat physical damage. The only requirement for this to work is that you are on low life. Later on, when I activate my auras, I'm going to show you how we get the build to low life and why it's actually a fantastic thing for this type of build. Okay, so Bloodthirst support adds a lot of flat physical damage, and then we have Impale scaling, which is giving us more damage, as well as flat physical damage from our Ascendency. So that should explain the bread and butter of how we're scaling damage in this build. Now that you understand Bladestorm, now that you understand Impale, and you understand where we're getting our flat physical damage from, I think it's about time for us to break down the rest of the build as I typically do in my other videos. Let's start with the gearing section. So right off the bat, we are using a very cheap budget option for our weapon. This is Sinvicta's Mettle. This is a extremely common unique. It costs a couple of chaos at most, even on Leaguestart. It's very simple. It does increase physical damage. It has increased attack speed, and then you get the Rampage modifier. The Rampage modifier is like a kill streak. As long as you keep killing enemies, you get Rampage to stack up, and then it does a bunch of effects based on different milestones that you hit. At 500 Rampage stacks, you might do a big Nova explosion. At 750, maybe you summon some minions that run around and kill enemies. The Rampage is just a cherry on top. It's not really instrumental to the build. We're just using Sinvicta's Mettle because it's a unique. It does a decent amount of damage, and it's very accessible. The only other 2 uniques this build uses is Asenath's Gentle Touch. This one I expect to be a little bit expensive on Leaguestart. A lot of people want to use this because it is an extremely good starter unique. What does it do? It gives you a bit of intelligence, it gives you life and mana, It gives you access to temporal chains on hit, which means you're getting curse accessibility without having to press another button or investing into corruptions. And then more importantly, it gives you corpse removal and a little bit of clear speed boost. Enemies killed near corpses affected by your curses explode, dealing 3% of their life as physical damage. Alright, the damage is okay. Sometimes you shotgun and clear packs of monsters, right? It all gets concentrated onto the rare monster and he's a little bit easier to kill. But more importantly, this gives you access to corpse removal, which means enemies cannot detonate, corpses, they can't interact with them, and you might not die to on-death effects as much. It just feels really good to use. It's fairly affordable on Leaguestart, and yeah, that's why we're using it. The third and final unique for this build is Perseverance Vanguard Belt. This is a belt that gives you increased maximum life. It gives you cold resistance. There is a modifier here that makes you deal increased attack damage based on the lowest of your armor or evasion. We are not using any evasion at all. We're using all armor, so that modifier is completely useless. It says melee hits with stun, fortify. We don't care about that. We always have fortify because of our ascendancy anyways. The most important reason for using this belt is you have onslaught while fortified. You cannot see that buff on me right now. That's because I actually unspec'd of the fortify ascendancy node here. So fortitude gives us 15 fortification at all times. All right, I'll activate it. You'll see that we are now fortified, and now that we are fortified, we are now under the Onslaught effect. Okay, Onslaught increases your attack, cast speed, and movement speeds by 20%. Fortify makes you take 15% less damage from hits at 15 stacks. Okay, this also makes it so that we don't have to use the Fortify support gem in our 5 link, so that frees up that support gem to use something that deals more damage. Alright, so that is the 3 uniques we are using for this build. I expect Perseverance to be a little bit more expensive depending on the rolls. Go for a low roll for cold resist if you want it to be cheap. Go for a high one if you want to spend a little bit of money. That will ease the amount of pressure you put onto your rare items. That way you don't need as much resistance elsewhere. Okay, for our jewelry, guys, I recommend using the turquoise amulet. We need this for dexterity and intellect. And then for our rings, we're going to use amethyst rings so we can get our chaos resistance. Alright, the only mods on the jewelry that matter is the prefix and the suffix. Because we are doing a Bloodthirst build, life is extremely important. Every piece of your gear should have life, except the uniques that don't have that, of course. So we have tier 1 life here, and then we have tier 2 chaos resist, as well as some other goodies. These might look a little bit out of your reach for Leaguestart, but I guarantee you they are extremely easy to craft. Take your jewelry, go to the Horticrafting bench, and then do Harvest Reforge for Chaos. Alright, this is going to make it so that you get a Chaos Resist for sure, and then you're just going to spam it until it comes alongside a high life modifier. Alright, so we have life, Chaos Resist, life, Chaos Resist, life, chaos resist, and sometimes you get lucky and you get lightning resist or you get cold resist. That will decrease the amount of pressure you need to put on your other rare items. For your benchcraft, I recommend using the +1 to minimum endurance charges suffix. Put these on all 3 pieces of your jewelry and you will have +3 endurance charges at all time. I don't know if this is going to be nerfed in patch 3.26. Endurance charges were so strong in Settlers of Kalgor. I wouldn't be surprised to see them brought down a notch. If they are nerfed and they're no longer as valuable, put in a resistance benchcraft onto your jewelry so that once again you don't have to depend on your rares to have amazing rolls in order to make them usable. For our rares, we've gone with armor base, so we're using the new bases added in patch 3.25. We have Giant Slayer Helm, we have Royal Plate, and we have Leviathan Greaves. How I created these items is I used Deafening Essences that apply resistances onto the gear, so you get 1 resist guaranteed. You're going to spam those essences until you get a high life modifier. So here you can see we have tier 2 life, and then here we have tier 2 life, and here we have and we couldn't get life, we needed movement speed instead, so I bench crafted life instead, okay? These aren't that amazing, guys. These aren't hard to make. You can do it with essence crafting. Maybe you'll find one on trade that someone rog crafted, right? Jewelry is harvest reroll. This is extremely SSF friendly as long as you can actually do the mechanics like essences or harvest that gives you the resources you need to craft these. Assuming Eldritch Implicits are still around in patch 3.26, we want to use life regeneration per endurance charge on our boots and increase action speed. Then for our chest, we want to use physical damage from hits taken as fire, and then damage taken recouped as life. And then for our helmet, we want to use physical damage from hits taken as fire and physical damage taken recouped as life. Okay, these are done with lesser Eldritch, Ichors, and Embers. These are extremely accessible on Leaguestart. It just requires you to run altars. So right off the bat, gearing is very cheap, very affordable, very accessible. This is stuff that you only need for running T16 maps. Up until then, just use the best rares you can with life, with resistances, with move speed, and then try saving up for Asenath's Touch and the Perseverance Vanguard Belt. For our flasks, guys, we're using one life flask. I recommend it to have some sort of instant modifier on it. Right now, I'm using immunity to bleed and corrupted blood, but once you get a rare jewel that has been corrupted to give you corrupted blood immunity, then you can switch this flask into immunity to poison, okay? Because we're getting bleed immunity from our passives. I'll walk you through that later. For our utility flasks, I'm using a quartz flask for phasing, I'm using a quicksilver for movement speed, a granite flask for armor, and then I am using a sulfur flask when we hit a rare or unique enemy. This creates consecrated ground, increases our damage, and regenerates our life while we stand on the consecrated ground. So with the gearing out of the way, let's go over the skills and support gems. We talked about Bladestorm of Uncertainty. Get 20% quality on this as soon as possible. It makes it so you have access to one extra storm. So instead of 3 storms, you can make 4 storms. Very nice, more damage, more clear. Very, very important. We are using close combat support. This only works with axes and swords. It deals more damage the closer you are to your enemies, and then it increases the attack speed of your next travel skill. Then we are using multi-strike support. This lowers your attack damage but increases your attack speed. That's why the build feels so fast to play. Because it is a hit damage build using Impales, our overall average damage for single target is unaffected. As long as you're standing still and holding your skill down, you're going to repeat it once, you're going to repeat it twice, and the repeats do more damage, so it is a more multiplier to our damage and our clear speed. The next support gem we're using is Brutality Support. This makes it so your skills deal more physical damage at the cost of not dealing chaos or elemental damage. The reason I'm using this over something like melee physical damage support is because melee physical damage support comes with a less attack speed multiplier. I like my builds to feel fast, even if it means I deal a little bit less damage. So use Brutality, use melee phys damage support, it's up to you. All of them kind of do the same thing, just in a slightly different way. Alright, our 5th support gem, because we are only using a 5-link, is Bloodthirst support. Alright, I already explained to you how this works. It requires our character to be on low life, and when we're on low life, we get 129 added flat physical damage, which is very nice. Alright, in our chestplate, I also have Frostblink. We use this to move around. And then let's look at our other travel skill. We're using Leap Slam, connected to faster attack support, momentum support, and culling strike support. Alright, and more importantly, we need to talk about our auras. So our first aura is Purity of Elements. We're using this for elemental resistances to lower the pressure on how good our rares need to be. But also, we're using it for ailment immunity. There are so many ways to get ailment immunity on your build, guys, but all of them require investment. You need unique jewels that can cost a couple of divines. You need to essence craft your boots to have a chance to avoid shock or chance to avoid ailments. You are probably not going to have that type of currency to do that on Leaguestart weekend. So let's keep things simple. Let's keep things easy. We'll use Purity of Elements, get that ailment immunity, even if it comes at the cost of dealing less damage by not using something like Pride. Right, the other auras or reservation skills we are using is Blood and Sand. Let me turn that on right now. You'll see that it reserves 10% of my hit points. That's because we're a blood magic build. And we can press this button to deal more damage in Blood Stance, or we can press this button to give us more area of effect for Sand Stance. The next skill we are using is Petrified Blood. This is extremely important. Also focus on getting quality on this gem because it lowers the damage you take. Okay, Petrified Blood protects the lower half of your life pool. Since we're a low life build, that's basically our entire life pool. The way it protects your life is by mitigating the hit damage you take. So let's say I got hit for 1,000 damage. I take a portion of it immediately, and then I take a second portion of it, distributed as a damage over time effect. Okay, so the numbers on these values vary depending on the quality and the level of Petrified Blood, but at max level, max quality, let's say I got hit for 1,000 damage, I take 600, okay, and then the remaining 400 is redistributed as damage over time. This means that we can use things like life regeneration, life leech, and other ways of getting life back to mitigate the damage over time that is redistributed through Petrified Blood. Long story short, if you're playing a low life build, you need to use Petrified Blood. And in our case, it's actually really good for our build. I'm going to break down why that is when we get into the passive section of this video. Alright, the other aura we are using is Vitality. We're reserving this on life. It is giving us increased life regeneration per second. With aura reservations out of the way, let's talk about other quality of life. We have automation connected to Blood Rage. This just makes it so that Blood Rage keeps casting whenever I am in a combat area. That way we'll always have uptime on Blood Rage. And of course, Blood Rage is giving us access to Frenzy charges while we are mapping, which increases our damage, speed, and all that jazz. We're using cast when damage taken support with Molten Shell since we are an armor build. That way when we take a bit of damage, we will mitigate some of that by getting the Molten Shell guard skill buff. Okay, the last few things to note is that we have a war banner here. I already mentioned this before. Kill enemies or damage bosses to generate valor, and then when you're standing still and you're committing to the kill, activate war banner and it will increase the physical damage you deal with melee skills. Okay, and then you basically rinse and repeat. And then we also have Enduring Cry because our character only has one life flask. If we run out of life flasks and we are, in need of a little bit of life recovery in a jam, we'll use Enduring Cry. Right? We also have an empty socket here on our helmet that is attached to our reservation skills. This is where you'd put your Enlighten if and when you get that. I don't expect you to have that on day one, so having Enlighten here will lower the life reservation, and there's going to be some benefits to that that we'll talk about with the passive section, okay? So I think I already went over quality. Make sure Purity of Elements is quality. That'll give you 5% extra resists. Make sure Bladestorm of Uncertainty is quality. It'll give you +1 Bladestorm. And make sure Petrified Blood is quality. It'll make it so that you mitigate more damage with the damage over time portion of the skill, okay? With gearing out of the way, let's briefly talk over the passives, guys. I'm not going to go into this in too much depth. I'll save that for the build guide video if the build is still playable after the live stream reveal and the patch notes reveal. So yeah, let's talk about this super quick. You're going to want to go out of the duelist area as soon as possible. Early on, go through these notes so you deal more attack physical damage. Later on, respec out of it and then go through the stats here so you have more passive points to spend elsewhere. We get Master of the Arena for life regeneration as well as a little bit of damage. We get Destroyer for damage and attack speed with two-handed weapons. We take Bravery for increased life and a little bit of armor. The evasion rating from this is useless. We don't use evasion. We get Art of the Gladiator for attack speed, Dexterity. Dexterity is important here. And to improve our movement speed by ignoring all movement speed penalties from armor. Okay, we go outward over here. We grab Unwavering Stance. We're not an evasion build, which means this is not a downside. This gives us stun immunity, and we're not evading anyways, so get this, really nice. Right, then we are going down over here, getting Brinkmanship. This increases your increased area of effect with melee skills, and gives us access to Attack Mastery for monsters cannot block your attacks. Then you want to go here and get all of the Impale nodes here. Start with Chance to Impale. respec out of Chance to Impale and go into Impale effect when you get more Chance to Impale elsewhere. There's other Impale clusters for you to work on, okay? And here you want to get Impale damage dealt to enemies impaled by you, ignores enemy physical damage reduction. That's the first Impale mastery you want to get. All right, then we go here, we get this two-handed cluster over here. Wrecking Ball, this gives you attack speed and increase physical damage with two-handed weapons. We take physical attack damage nodes here. Get Bastion Breaker. This is all attack physical damage. And then you get Physical Mastery, which increases the physical damage you do with skills that cost life. And because we are a blood magic build, all of our skills will cost life. Okay, so don't get this mastery until you've gotten blood magic. So yeah, make sure you get this. You go down here, you take more Impale nodes, leading up to Brutal Skewering. This makes your Impale last 6 hits instead of 5. And then you get Impale Mastery here, get 10% chance on hitting an enemy for all Impales on the enemy to last 1 additional hit. Then we take some Life Leech nodes here. It doesn't really matter what you get, like these are just all, they're useful, they're nothing really to worry about. The reason we take them though is to get access to Leech Mastery. 10% of Leech is instant. This makes it so that you have a lot of life on hit by using this mastery, okay? Go up here, take Golem's Blood for increased life and life regeneration, then take Cloth and Chain, it'll give you some resistances and some armor, and then take Armor and Evasion Mastery to get immunity to bleeding if equipped helmet has higher armor than evasion rating. For our Anoint, I've already mentioned that we get Forceful Skewering. Get this once you're happy with your amulet. It is a very cheap Anoint. It is Verdant Azure Violet Oils with the Blight mechanic. And then we are going in this direction. You probably need to get a Dexterity node. We only have 107 Dexterity. That's including Art of the Gladiator and Proficiency. So take this if you need it. Alright, go here, get Bloodless for increased maximum life, and enemies cannot leech life from you. Alright, remember to take Blood Magic probably around Act 4 before we go down this direction. Alright, you want to get into Blood Magic as soon as possible because it just makes your build feel so much better. Alright, we can drop Mana Flask, we don't need to worry about mana cost, everything feels so good with Blood Magic. And even before you get Blood Magic, get Resolute Technique, that way you don't have to worry about accuracy, okay? But following the tree, go here and take Juggernaut. This is increased armor and increased maximum life. There's also an armor mastery that comes attached. If you have the additional point to spend, you can take 30% reduce extra damage from critical strikes. That gives you a little bit of mitigation for when you start running yellow and red maps and enemies start critting you for bank. Okay, here we take Harpooner. This is a two-hand Impale cluster. It increases your chance to impale with two-handed attacks, and it also increases the effect of the impales you inflict with two-handed attacks. Alright, go up here, take Slaughter for attack speed and damage with axes. You also gain 1 Rage on hit. Rage will give you up to 30% more attack damage when it is fully stacked. This will help you in your single target damage situations more than anything. Then take Cleaving, which is just really good at efficient damage nodes for axes. But take Axe Mastery. Here you can take 10% more damage with hits and ailments against enemies that are on low life. Or if you prefer to have a little bit more area of effect, you can take Increase area of effect while in Sand Stance, right? You will be using Sand Stance for mapping and Blood Stance for single target damage on the map bosses. Here we take Barbarism for some life and increased maximum and fire resistances. I already told you about Resolute Technique. Alright, and then we are going towards the Marauder side. Pick up Kinetic Impacts for a chance to deal double damage, as well as increase damage with two-handed physical melee weapons. Make sure to take two-handed Mastery here to deal 3% chance to deal triple damage. I forgot to mention the two-handed mastery over here in the Wrecking Ball cluster. Take 40% increased damage with hits against rare and unique enemies. Okay, then you want to go into the Marauder. You want to get Warrior's Blood for regenerate life. Then you want to take all of these small life and armor nodes. Then you want to take Heart of the Warrior for increased max life, Born to Fight for increased fist damage and attack speed, and then you wrap up by going upwards here towards the Scion Life Wheel, pick up Constitution, pick up all the little life nodes, 5% life nodes, and then pick up this Jewel Socket, where you can put in your Corrupted Blood Immunity socket. Try to get a jewel with good mods on it, maybe elemental resistances, increased damage with axes, stuff like that, okay? And that's the basic rundown of the passive skill tree at level 90, alright? At level 100, this will look a little bit different. You're probably going to have some cluster jewel setups. You'll probably have a little bit more dual sockets, okay, and we'll probably spec out of some of these little life nodes because by the time you are level 95, level 100, you're going to have a better weapon than Sinvicta's Mettle, and the better your weapon, the worse the Bloodthirst support is, so we might not even be a low life build when we are finished optimizing the build. I guess I also need to talk about Ascendencies. Start off by taking Master of Mettle in normal lab. This gets your Impale scaling up and running. It also gives you that flat physical damage, which is extremely strong for the campaign. Then you're going to take Fortify in Cruel Lab. This lets you drop the Fortify support gem. Use the Fortify support gem until you get this, okay? This will make it so you're always fortified. Then you can take Conqueror. This makes it so that you take 10% reduced damage if you've taunted an enemy recently, and you will taunt enemies with your hits. It's just a little survivability for your character. Very nice. And then wrap it up in Uber Lab with first to strike, last to fall. Your hits permanently intimidate enemies, making them take increased attack damage. And more importantly, you gain access to the Adrenaline buff, which gives you 100% increased damage, 25% increased attack speed, cast speed, and move speed, and 10% additional physical damage reduction. All right, how are we going to proc Adrenaline, guys? This is where low life shines. So you can see here, I have 45% of my life reserved, and Petrified Blood makes it so that you can never heal back up to above 50% of your life, okay? So I'm going to start attacking here. You'll notice my life slowly begins to drop. Right? Eventually, it's going to drop until I have exactly 50% reserved, and that little 5%, you see that little sliver of emptiness underneath my reserved life and above my actual life? That portion of my life can only be topped up by using a life flask. We cannot leech, we cannot regen, we cannot recover life to get above that unless we use this life flask. Now you're probably thinking, why the hell is that important? Well, if you look at Last to Strike, First to Fall, that's not what it's called, but if you look at this Ascendency, it procs when you hit low life. Okay, so for demonstration purposes, I took out Automate Support just so I can cast Blood Rage while we're in King's March. So how do we get to low life, guys? I'll put on Blood Rage here so it starts draining my HP. Okay, and remember, life regeneration cannot heal you above this 50% mark, okay? So I use a health pot that puts me at 55% HP, and then Blood Rage drains me down to 50%, and as soon as that happens, Adrenaline is now active for 20 seconds. Okay, so you have Adrenaline on demand with this build, which is actually just insane. I'm going to do it once again, just for demonstration. Okay, so you can see I have no Adrenaline, I'm at 50% HP, I use something like Blood Rage that drains my HP, and then I top my HP up to 55%, and as soon as it drops back to 50, bam, Adrenaline is active. Right, this is going to be up all the time while you're mapping. It's one of the reasons the build is so fast. I guess you can see this is the default movement speed. I'll do it again. So this is with Adrenaline, and with Onslaught, our movement speed is 70%, and then you pop the Quicksilver. All right, and now you are at 110%. And then you can see with the Leap Slam, right, we are zooming all over the place. Add in Frostblink, and you are blasting now. Okay, so let's go back to our little sheep corner over here and wrap up this video. So I'll put automation back onto my build, and I'll activate that. Okay, so that is Adrenaline. All right, I want to wrap up the video by talking about room for further upgrades. So first of all, we're going to want to get a better axe. You can essence craft a Sundering Axe. It'll guarantee flat physical damage if you use Shrieking Essence of Contempt, and then you want to roll until you get a high attack speed modifier, and then you bench craft Chance to Bleed and increase physical damage on it, and you are good in terms of a weapon upgrade. Alright, we also want to use a 6th link. Right, when we are optimizing this character, we will be going into bleeds, so your 6th link, I would recommend you use Volatility on the 6th link, and then you probably change Close Combat into melee physical damage support. At that point, we're running out of good support gems to use, and melee physical damage support is just better than close combat because it will also affect your ailments as well as your hit damage. Okay, so 6th link, that is further upgrades. You want to improve your jewelry incrementally, so you want something like life and then 2 or 3 resists, and you want that on every slot so you can have a little bit of leeway on your rare. Depending on how much money you want to throw at the build, you could go for evasion armor hybrid. That would require you to swap out of unwavering stance and find another solution to stun immunity. I recommend immutable force at 961, increase stun recovery if that's the route you want to go. And then you would get spell suppression on these 3 pieces, and then maybe you have a quartz flask running. Then you would get a anoint for inveterate. I believe that is over here. All right, that would give you 15% chance to suppress spell damage, and then you would cap spell suppression, and then you'd have another layer of defense for an already somewhat tanky build. Swapping into bleed also means getting rid of the Perseverance unique belt. Instead, you would use Rizlatha's Coil. Rizlatha's Coil increases the top end of your damage at the cost of reducing the bottom end, so you'll have a higher range, but because Bladestorm hits so fast and frequently, you'll be rolling the dice more often within a high range, and chances are is you'll apply a bleed with a very high damage roll. Okay, so Rizlatha's Coil would be our best in slot belt. When you're in bleed, you want to swap out of Asenaths and into Hemophilia. That'll give you the bleed explosions as well as chance to inflict bleeds, and then you'll want to pick up some of those bleed nodes on your passive tree, something like bleed chance or bleed damage and chance, and you can get those things to increase your chance to bleed, so you're always inflicting a bleed when you hit the enemy. Alright, you'll change your physical mastery so that you have +6 to damage over time multiplier, 4 bleeding per impale on enemy. Since we plan to have 9 impales on the enemy, this will be 9 times 6, which is 54% damage over time multiplier, which is huge for one node. Alright, we're basically trying to get the best of both worlds in terms of hit damage and bleed damage without overcommitting to one, so efficiency is the name of the game. Alright, so that covers the gloves, the rares. You could improve your Eldritch Implicits. You could quality all of your support gems. You could toss the Enlighten in here. What happens when you toss Enlighten into this setup? It means that instead of reserving 45%, right, we can take a life mastery here and make it so our low life threshold starts at 55% instead of 50%. That'll give you a little bit of extra survivability. The reason we need Enlighten for that is because we still need this little sliver of emptiness in order to proc our adrenaline on demand, okay? So don't accidentally screw your build up by picking the wrong reservation, and then you can't proc adrenaline, and then you lose a lot of your oomph. Okay, so I think we've talked about everything here. Our flasks would look relatively the same. This is not a Mage Blood build or a Headhunter build. Rizlatha's for bleed is just miss. Maybe we find some interesting things with Impale. I already talked to you guys about Purity of Elements. If you can find an alternative to get your ailment immunity, if you have good enough rares to make up for the elemental resistances, you take this out, you put the Pride aura in. Pride makes it so enemies take more physical damage while you're in their presence. Then you use the Watcher's Eye to give you additional 2 impales on enemies affected by Pride, taking us up from 7 impales to 9 impales with the Watcher's Eye setup, okay? So all that is super cool. And then the last thing you could do is you could look for Maven's Impossible Escape. That is a unique jewel, I think, from Uber Maven. It lets you allocate things in a radius around one of the notables. What I would recommend you to do is I think you would go for Vol Pact. So you put it in and it'd show you a little circle on your screen, and then you could put points into any of these nodes that is within that circle. I would take Savage Skewering for Impale effect. You might be able to take some of these nodes too. Impale effect here, there's Onslaught effect here, armor and evasion and spell suppression, more leech. Alright, lots of stuff for you to choose from if you decide to go that route. Alright, with that said, guys, thank you for watching. Once again, I want to say everything here is speculative, everything here is tentative, everything here is subject to change. Please don't fall in love with an idea and then hate me for it if GGG decides to unalive our build by the time 3.26 launches. If the build is still playable, possible, after patch notes, I will be posting a full comprehensive build guide as I typically do, and then you can expect, day 1, day 2, day 3 updates, because I do want to league start this build if possible. And if not, don't worry, I have a couple of other tricks up my sleeve. I heard Poisonous Concoction of Bouncing, or P-Bonc as I call it, is quite good. We would do that on the Deadeye and then swap into a Pathfinder to scale it into the end game. With that said, thank you guys for watching. Like it if you found it useful. Subscribe if you want more PoE 1 out of 1 content. But more importantly, let me know down in the comments below what your plans are for Leaguestart, what you intend to be playing. Maybe you guys will do Ice Nova again if it's somehow still playable in patch 3.26. But yeah, thanks for watching. Life's going to be busy leading up to the launch of 3.26, but I'll try to sneak in a video if at all possible, so I'll see you soon. Bye!